I am Austin. I've been working in AAA games and the film industry for about 4 years now, doing a lot of, when I was in film virtual production, which was still running real time in Unreal Engine, and then in AAA games, obviously real time as well. I worked on Forza Motorsport, John Wick, Planet of the Apes, just to name a few things. All right, hello. Welcome back. This is going to be kind of a continuation after our modeling breakdown in the last video. Today we're going to go over the very basics of UV unwrapping and texturing in Substance Painter. For those that don't know what UV unwrapping is, I like to use this picture as a quick little demonstration. I'm not sure if you've seen this holiday candy before, but it's a pretty popular one for showing UV unwrapping, mainly because it has a square wrapping. As you can see, the image on the right here is the fully wrapped chocolate candy, and it looks like Santa Claus, but when you unwrap it, it looks really strange in its flattened form. That's essentially what we're going to be doing here with our model that we have. So I went ahead and modeled this, and the files are in the Discord for those that need it. It's just a quick little simple crate that I got a reference for. Nothing super complicated, and I made the model pretty low poly as well, just so we can go through the UV a little quicker. That way I can get through this and the texturing. What we're going to do is select any object, and we have this window at the top called UV editing. That'll open up our UV window. If I go into face mode and select it, you can see that this doesn't really look like the model over here. That's because this window doesn't update as you're modeling. So the first step of UV unwrapping is to actually select all of our objects and apply all of our transformations. That's going to make sure that Blender knows the accurate size of all of our meshes, which is going to be really important when it comes to packing our UVs, which I'll go over in a little bit. So as we can see, this still looks the same because we haven't actually edited our UVs. So I can go over here and go into the unwrap section, and it didn't unwrap it because it says seams may need to be added. And that is correct. We haven't added any seams yet. These objects are simple enough that we could probably do a smart UV project and it would work. But I will show how to do this first off, and then we can go through and maybe do some smart UV projects afterwards, just so you can see that process on simple assets. The more organic the asset is, the less likely that's going to work, and we'll get into that in a second. So what we do to add seams is I'm actually going to isolate this mesh. We just have to select our edges and right click, and we can add a seam. So we can mark a seam or mark sharp here at the bottom. If we have our geometry data, we do not want custom split geometry data, so that's fine. But we are going to go into the normals here and turn on auto smooth. What that does is essentially it marks anything sharp that's over this angle. You'll see that especially on a lot of these smoother objects here. Anything that we want to have a smooth curve on, I have auto smooth on. If I turn it off, it gets a little funky on the shading here. So we keep that on, and that is marking things as sharp. And it's important to know because anything that's marked as sharp needs to have a UV seam. There's a really technical reason behind that, but for now, it's not really important to know. Just have that as a general rule. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these as seams. They're already marked as sharp, but if I want to, I can also mark them as sharp. And I know that these are all going to be seams just because this is a square with 6 sides. So I've marked them all as sharp, and now I can come here and unwrap them. And we can see that it already automatically has fit them to the UV square and has unwrapped everything where it looks like it's in the correct proportion. So if I select this face, that looks to be about the same size in relation to all of the other faces that are here. So we're going to go through and do that to all of these other ones. I will try a smart project on this one. So what this does is if I go to wrap, smart project, what it does is it checks the angle of all of the edges, very similar to how the auto smooth works. And we can ignore the rest of this for now because we're going to repack it later. What this does is basically packs as well as does the angle. And again, we'll go over packing after this. So this is going to work because of this mesh. So I can go ahead and do that. Unwrap smart project, and I'm wrong. That doesn't work. So we still need to mark our seams. And now it'll work. So you still need to mark your seams on everything. Blender doesn't have the best UV tools out there, to be quite honest, but they are fine for what we're doing. So again, I know that this is a pretty simple part of the mesh, so we're going to mark our seams. And we can go over here and select it again and unwrap this one. And the reason that I gave this file as a Blender file instead of just giving you the mesh itself is because I have modifiers on a lot of these that are mirrored across to the other side. So by giving you this file, it's going to cut down the amount of UVing you have to do by half. So this object is actually both sides, but it's mirrored across. If I were to turn this off, that one disappears, just so you only have to UV it once. And we'll move through that. And again, on this one, seam, go over here and unwrap. So if I select all of my models, we can see the red edges are UV seams. So all of the simple objects have been UV'd. And again, these ones don't show up because they're mirrored. So then we have these little more complicated ones to workflow. And that's what I wanted to spend most of our time working on. So we'll start with this latch here. So when I'm thinking about UV seams, those are also where breaks are going to occur in our textures. We want them on the edges of objects just because those are naturally where textures would break anyway. But with something like this, we don't want to have, for example, this edge be a seam because there would be a break on our texture here. So we need to think about where that's going to be. I know that on the inside, there is a mesh here. And so we're not actually going to bump into anything if this UV seam is here. We view this asset from this side. So no player would ever be able to actually see this UV seam. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as a seam. I've also grabbed these two edge loops at the bottom because those were marked as sharp from our auto smoothing, but these would also need to be seams. That way we can lay this out. So when I unwrap this, we're going to see that this is kind of unwrapped a little funky, and we have our two caps here that are unwrapped as we would expect them to be unwrapped. So we can ignore those and focus on this thing. So why did this lay out as a really long rectangle with some weird curves? Again, this goes back to this example image here. Things tend to look a little distorted in our UV sphere or our UV grid as opposed to what they look like in our modeling software. And that's just because laying it out flat. What we really want is for this to be a perfect rectangle. There are plenty of add-ons that are free for Blender that are out there. I use one called Text Tools, and in here I can use the rectify option. That's going to make that a rectangle. This just helps with texturing. When it was all distorted and wobbly, imagine that, you know, this grid was a texture. That would also kind of happen to our model. So this is just kind of a best practice workflow to make sure that everything is laid out nice and neat. And so now we'll continue on that process to the rest of these. Again, this one's going to be pretty similar here. I'm going to manually select some of these edges that I know need to be seams. I know these need to be seams because this is the edge of the mesh. This one needs to be a seam because it's marked as sharp, and same with these top ones. Then exact same thing on this side. I'm just holding shift while clicking to select multiple edges at the same time. And then that one. So I'll mark these as seams and see if I missed anything. Does not look like I did. So now I'll go ahead and unwrap it. And cool, that looks correct except for this thing. So if you see overlapping islands, that probably means that I missed an edge, and I did. I missed this one right here. So that's just a good demonstration of what happens when you miss something. It'll look kind of funky and like overlapping assets here, or overlapping, these are called shells, UV shells, but overlapping polygons here is not a good thing. So we'll re-unwrap it. It became bigger because I didn't have everything selected. So I'll select everything and re-unwrap it, and it'll be nice and neat packed in here with no overlapping islands. Now we'll move on to this one. And again, it's the same thing. This can be a little bit of a tedious process, especially depending on the asset. It can take a little while. So again, same thing. We're going to go through here and look for seams. I already know that these are already marked as sharp, so these need to be seams. And when you're a little far away, sometimes Blender doesn't like to select everything that you want it to. Well, I can mark these as seams and then reset my view. If you accidentally mark something as a seam that you don't want to be, there's an option right underneath it called clear seam. So no worries there. And I'll just continue through here, marking these as seams. And now we have this bottom part of the asset to do. We'll take these. And through here, mark a seam, and then this top section here. Okay, so I think I have everything. I'm not exactly sure on this one. It's a little bit more of a complicated asset, so let me go ahead and unwrap this. Cool, so this island looks really funky and distorted, and there's a bunch of overlapping here. I know that that's going to be this island, or at least I was pretty sure it's going to be that island. Let's see, what island is this one? It's this back island. And the reason is because I missed these edges here. So this is a little bit of guess and check work, or more accurately, look and see what is looking incorrect. With the overlapping edges here, we know that that's going to be incorrect. So now we'll unwrap it again, and everything looks nice and neat. This piece is okay. I don't think it would cause any issues for it to stay like this. However, I do think that it would be better to minimize some of the stretching that's happening up in here by adding a seam here and separating it like this. Notice that this will not be marked as sharp because it's not marked as sharp here. If I were to mark it as sharp, we'd get a weird normal error here. So let me go ahead and unwrap this again. Oops, I select everything in here. And just checking. Okay, so there's a little bit of funky stuff left. And I'm guessing that that's going to be in here. Yep, so it's on the inside part of this. Honestly, it's not the biggest deal in the world if there's a UV error on something that someone's not going to see. However, it's still best practice to go ahead and fix those errors, especially in a production environment. Things can change and somebody might see the inside of this eventually. It's also just, best to do things the proper way. And it looks like I missed some edges down here as well. So we'll mark these as seams. All right, so now everything looks nice and orderly. Nope, still see an error here. So in here, if I actually want to select something, because I don't know exactly where this would be on the mesh, we can go here and turn that on, the sync selection, and then I can go in here, select my faces, and it'll show me on the model which faces are actually causing the overlaps here. So this is just some of the hidden faces that are inside of the model. So to fix that, instead of doing it manually, let's do a smart UV project. And that seems to have fixed our errors. Because everything was marked as a seam, there was just some quick modeling done in there and left an extra face. So this one is now unwrapped correctly. And if I have forgotten which assets I have unwrapped, I can select everything, press 2, and then the ones that don't have any seam information on them are the ones we haven't done. So I know it's these bolts and these two assets here at the bottom. So let me grab these first. Let's just try to do a smart UV project here and see if that does anything for us. And it looks like it does. The only thing that I might say about this is these shells have a UV seam on the bolt somewhere. We just can't see it right now. But if I isolate the mesh and then go and look at it, we can see our UV seam. So when I unhide everything, that's probably not the most visible seam right there, so that's fine. That is why we would want to do it manually as opposed to doing a smart UV project, but that's good enough for now. And then we'll select this one and do the same thing. This one I will show what I would do on an asset that is basically a cylinder. So first we'll mark the seams on the outsides just to get everything set up. But here on the inside, if I were to unwrap this right now, and I can show this actually, we're going to get a really weird error. Oh, it already gave us the seam unwrap. Okay, so it's because it started as a cylinder, it has a seam, and actually unwrapped this properly, but I was concerned about, was this inside? Oh no, it did give us the error. So it actually is a circle. And you might think that that's correct because this is a circle, but what we want are these faces to be laid out in a line, just like the outside is over here. What this is giving us right now, and it's hard to see in here, is UV distortion. One edge, this edge is actually smaller in our UV space than this other edge. So if we were to have this grid pattern, it would be distorted on our object. So I need to pick the best spot to do a UV seam. So I'm going to pick here. And the reason is because this object and the asset is so close to the mesh that your player is not going to be able to see from this angle into the mesh. They're probably not even going to be that close, so they can't see that seam from where a player would be. So when I unwrap this, now we have these two strips over here. And then our last asset here, let's try to do a smart project with this curved bottom. It might not work, but let's see. That one did look like it worked. So if we do a smart project like that, you'll notice there's no seams. So I'll grab all of these edges and do UV seams from islands right here, and that will convert all of our islands to seams. Doing that though, I notice that these are not marked as a seam, and I would want them to be, whereas these I don't want to be marked as seams. So I'm going to clear them and then re-unwrap it. So that is the downside of doing some of this by hand, is you don't kind of get the same control that you would if you were to do it by hand, but obviously we do want to speed up some of this process as much as we can. Cool. So now we have all of our assets UV unwrapped here. There are some that are mirrored. So before we do our final packing, we will have to unmirror those. So let me go ahead and do that now. And by unmirroring, all that we're going to do is go into our modifier panels and apply our modifiers. So I'm going to do this on every single asset that has a modifier. If you're new to Blender, it's the ones that have a wrench up here in our hierarchy panel, so you can tell if it has a modifier. So go through and just apply all of these real quick. Cool. And we didn't do that before, again, because we wanted to not UV unwrap everything twice. So if we look over here, we already have all of these UV unwrapped. So that is great. So I'm going to select my entire model here and select everything inside of my UV window. I am going to go to UV dropdown, and we're going to do pack islands. What this is going to do, or what we should do first, is average island scale, since we unpacked everything separately. This is why we applied our transformations. So when we look at all of our UV islands here, they're all a bunch of different sizes. Some of them are really small, some of them are really big, and the reason is because it's these assets. This asset is proportionally smaller than the lid of the crate, for example. So we need it to take up a proportionally smaller amount of room on our UV island. We want everything to be the same. It's called texel density, but essentially we want 1 centimeter of space to take up the same amount of space on our UV island, no matter where it is on the asset. So that's why these latches are so much smaller than the rest of the crate. So now that we have all of that done, we can go here and go to pack islands. Pops up a huge box here. You're welcome to look through all of this on your own. For the most part, we are going to leave these as default. It should be fine for most of what you're doing. When we get to some more complicated things, like for example, UDIMs, we can go over this a little bit more. But for now, default is fine. We'll just hit OK, and Blender's going to think for a little bit and then pack everything into this 0 to 1 space. So what that means is just laying out all of our islands where there's no overlapping information in the most efficient way possible. So that is our asset UV'd. If you are going to follow your own asset through the pipeline instead of using my assets that I've provided, you can go to File and Export in FBX, and we'll load it into Painter, which is what I will switch over to now. So I will be using the file that I sent as well here. So I'm going to import my Crate UV and document resolution here. This is the texture size that we're going to use. As you get into more professional productions, this is going to really matter. There's a lot of rules that go into this. For now, I'm going to hit 2048 and leave it there just because we want this to look somewhat nice. This is theoretically going to go into a game jam. We want things to look correct. 4096 would kind of overkill. There's some texture memory budget stuff that's a little complicated that we can go into at a later date, but for now, let's do 2048. For our normal map format, I'm going to leave this as direct. That would be what Unreal Engine uses for their normal maps. Unity does use OpenGL for an example. The really only difference between those is an inverted green channel in the normal map. We can go into that a little bit more later, but for now, just leave that as DirectX. Our color management default should be Adobe Ace. Leave that there. We want linear, working color space. The rest of this you can kind of leave alone. Default's going to be fine on that, but make sure those are set up properly. We do the color management as Adobe Ace because that's the closest to Unreal Engine that Substance Painter has without doing a bunch of custom work behind the scenes that isn't super important right now. So we hit OK, and our asset is here in Substance Painter. Cool. The first thing that we're going to do in Substance Painter is get some more information. We call that baking. It's a way that we can use the model information to inform what was called smart materials in Substance Painter. So we're going to go into here, into our texture settings, down to where it says mesh maps. If you were to have baked them in a different program, such as Marmoset, you can bring them in and then import them into these spots. So we're going to do this in Painter. Select that big button that says Bake Mesh Maps. And all of the baked maps that we're able to do inside of Substance Painter. If you have a high definition model, which is just a high poly model, you can import that as well, and it'll bake the high poly detail onto the low poly. We don't have that for today. So by default, if you don't have one of those, it will use the low poly as the high poly mesh. So we're just going to hit bake selected textures, and it's going to run through and do some things, and we'll look at that in a second. So it baked our meshes for us, and we'll return to painting mode. And you'll now see that there's what looks like shadows around here. That's because there are shadows around here. That's our ambient occlusion. So if we go into our mesh maps and, for example, look at ambient occlusion, it'll be a black and white mask, and that just basically means this is where shadows are going to be. It did that with all of these meshes or all of these maps that you can see over here. And then we can use that to base our texturing off of. So we're going to go back to looking at the lighted material view. And as you get started in Substance Painter, we'll start with the basics of just applying smart materials. Later on, you'll have to learn how to build these yourselves. There's a lot of options in here. Some of them are custom ones that I've saved of that I've built. So if you see some things in here that you don't have, that's why. I will be sticking to things that I have or that come with default Substance Painter. If you've used mega scans before or heard of mega scans, these are pretty similar to those in the way that if you're working with someone in the industry or someone that has done a lot of game design work in the past, we kind of know what all of these look like on an asset, and we can tell it's just, oh, that was just the Substance default, which is a fine place to start. But as we get more advanced into our 3D workflows, we're going to want to move away from that. But for now, let's go ahead and grab one of these smart materials and throw it onto here. So when I'm looking at our asset here, it looks like a bunch of painted wood to me. So what I'm going to start with is this wood base and remove some of the stuff that I don't want. So I don't need those stains. This looks fine, but it's a different color than what we want. So I'm going to go until I can find where they actually have the color set up in here. It is this gradient node on the base. So we're going to go into here, click the color, and we're going to adjust it and make it a bit darker, a little more saturated to try to get closer to our reference here, which I just have up on the other screen. Also have these white stains, which I don't actually think I really want for this right now, so I'll also delete that. Great, so I'm going to actually rename this to Painted Wood. And these will be all the ones that Substance made, and now we're going to make our own layer for the green paint. So to do that, I'm going to hit this paint bucket here and add a fill layer, and I only want color information for now. So I'll hit the color, make sure that's the only one that's selected, and then we can go in here. If you have a color on a reference image you want to match, you can use the eyedropper tool to match it, or we can go in here and do this ourselves. I'm going to adjust that myself. Awesome, and that'll be close enough for now. And then I'm going to add roughness. This is going to be how shiny something is. So we can see it's super shiny when it's black and non-shiny at all when it's white or matte. So I'm going to make this a little bit about here. And that just comes with some trial and error and seeing what looks good. We'll leave it there for now. Paint should be slightly shinier than wood, but not actually on the shiny side. So we'll leave that there. And now we need to add this edge breakup. So this is something that's built into all of the smart materials automatically, but we'll have to do this ourselves for this one. So we're going to right click on our fill layer that we created and add, we're going to do a white mask for this one because we want all of this to be shown for now. And then we can go over here into our smart masks. This is actually why we baked all of these texture maps here, is because these are using all of these mesh maps to do some math operations and give us that breakup automatically. I'm going to go over here. We want our edge breakup. I'm looking for one in particular, gun edges, even though this isn't a gun. We'll drag that onto the actual mask itself, and then now we have our mask editor. I'm going to go ahead and invert that because I know that it only is tracking the edges, and now we can already see we have some breakup here. To add more, I can adjust this global balance slider, and we'll bring that up to add more damage to our edges. We have this damage in the front that we don't particularly want, and I know that that's texture 2, so I will reduce texture 2 a little bit. Great, so we have our edge breakup, like our reference. Now we want some of that wear that's in the middle of the paint. So this is just like Photoshop. If you use Photoshop, you can layer things on top of each other, and then we have our blending modes here, where we can go in and adjust our blending modes. I think it would be great to add a texture. So I can go over to our textures here, and in the search bar, I'm going to type in grunge. We have all of these wonderful grunge maps that come with Substance. So I'm going to right click on the mask editor here, and we're going to add a fill layer. And that's just currently a black and white slider based mask. To get one of these grunge maps onto here, we're going to say, great, let's add this one in. We'll drag that onto this grayscale over here. And that has applied it. If I alt click on the mask itself, I can see that grunge detail here. So I know that we need this to be a little bit heavier, and we want soft contrast, so we'll leave that down. And we can just play with some of these settings to get something that we like. Add scratches if we want that. There's some grain information in there. The other thing we can do is mess with our tiling and our scale. I'm going to switch this from UV projection to triplanar so that I can adjust this with a gizmo and put it in a place that I want. All that triplanar means is that it's actually ignoring our UV islands that we had and projecting it from the top down, left or right, or basically this box is how it's being projected onto there. So I want there to be more horizontal detail, so we'll add that there. And that's great. But you'll notice that we've lost our edges, and that's because of our blend mode. So normally what that does is it just takes that mask, and that's the only thing that's there, but we want both masks. So we're actually going to multiply those together, and now we have both of our masks coming through, and we have our edge breakup as well as our thin paint here. If you really want to do everything by hand, you can go in here and add a paint layer and just start painting things in here. You have a brush down here, and in our textures there's also a bunch of alphas for brushes, or pretty much there's a lot of things in here that you can use and get that working. And then there's our alpha section right here with all of our alphas for our brushes. So you can do all of this by hand, and I'll show that a little bit later when we go to add the text in. Okay, so we have our painted wood, and that looks pretty good to me for now. Honestly, I might make the wood a little bit darker if this was a production asset, but for now, I'm pretty happy with that. What we don't want is our wood to be on our metal assets. We could cover this up with a different layer, but for now, I'm going to add a white mask to our folder that's actually containing all of our information and add a paint layer. Over here, I can do the polygon fill option instead of the paint option. And then when I'm in my paint layer, it has all of these different modes here. If I hit the mesh fill mode, I can click on all of the meshes that I don't want the wood to be on, which is our handle meshes. And then it's not there anymore, which is great. And we'll actually take this mask and basically paint the opposite for the metal for this. That is actually going to be the exact same process. We'll start with a base layer here. So I'm going to go to, those don't look super great for what I want. Let's check up in these other ones. We'll go to Iron Forged and pick that one and put that on there. And that looks pretty close to what I want, pretty much out of the box. So we'll add a black mask this time because we want it to be a base of black so we can paint in our objects. So we'll add that paint layer again. We're still on the polygon fill and paint these in here. And I'm looking at the reference here. Honestly, that doesn't really look too far off from what the reference looks like. So it really to me doesn't look that different from what's there. There might be a little more scratches or a little more dinged up rust, but with our player not getting super close to these, they read fine from this distance. We can go in and add more if you want. Again, it'd be the same thing of just going in and adding those layers. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave that there and move on to the lettering. There's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to stick again with this default substance stuff. If I were to be doing this for a different project, I'd probably make all of these letters as an alpha in Photoshop and then bring that in. But Substance also has tools to bring in text, so I think it's important to show those off. So I'll have that up on my second monitor so I can see everything that's going on. And now we're going to add a new folder, and this is going to be our white text. And we'll add a paint layer this time. So when we add a paint layer, nothing's here because we have to paint it in. And we can add text this way. Again, paint it on. This is something that is possible, but I don't think it's the best way to do it because it's a destructive workflow. As in, once I paint on the paint layer, it's stuck that way. What I can do instead is make a fill layer, go in here and adjust all of my settings and get that ready to go. And we'll make this our text. And then I can go into our black mask, and then I can go in and add a paint layer. So we'll go to our black mask, and then we'll go to our fill layer, and then we'll go to our fill layer, and then we'll go to our black mask, 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 and then we'll go to our add a paint layer here, and then we can go to our text option over here at the very end. This is all of the text that you have on your computer. So any font that you have installed on your computer automatically shows up in here. I cannot remember if this font is one that I've had for years or if it was default with Windows. So I'll be using that one. Another one that you can use for a similar effect to the military lettering is going to be Impact font, but I'll be using this one, which is basically the same thing. So I'll be dragging that over here. If you also have the paint layer, you can put it in your alpha section instead. So let me show that too. If you have an alpha, you can just drag this text here. But for now, we'll drag that in. Here's where we'll edit our text. So I'm just going to do the widest layer of text first. Let me type that in. Made that as a fill layer. Sorry about that. Add paint. Okay. So I have my text here. We'll go ahead and increase the size of our brush until it's about the size that we want. And I'm looking at the reference while doing this. So I'll place that here. And then this is why I don't particularly enjoy the text in Painter, is we have to type this in every single time. If I really wanted to, I could do a new paint layer here for every single line of text. And the reason I would want to do that is, let's say that I get this, and we're going to go font size custom. That way it's the same every time. I should have set that up first. But let's say I put this over on the side here and I go, oh no, my art director wants it in the middle. If I have this set up like this, I can go in, move that layer to the bottom, and actually transform this layer itself, or redo this layer with it being its own separate layer. We go in and erase it, and it won't erase the rest of the lettering. If you wanted to go in and have this on the same layer, that would be a little bit hard. You have to be really careful while erasing to make sure that you didn't accidentally hit everything else. So I'm going to actually do a couple of these on the same layer just to speed up the process a little bit. When you're working, feel free to do that however you want. If you're working on an extremely complicated asset that's going to have tons of different materials on there, I would recommend doing more on one layer than less, as once you get to the hundreds and hundreds of layers, recalculating everything takes a long time. These lower ones are a little smaller, so I'm going to move the font size down a little bit. And got a couple more to do. Looking at the screen and typing is hard for me sometimes. And we'll place that there, and then add the last one on the front here. And we'll add the weight over here. Great. So I would add a new paint layer, and then I'll name this one the top of the box. And we'll do the ones that are at the very top. And I'm gonna have to kind of guess a little bit on what's up there and infer from the front, because the reference image doesn't show that one perfectly, but that's okay. We'll do the same 7.79 as we have on the front. We'll make this a bit bigger again. It's probably too big. Do A2. I think that says cartridge. And you'll see that the E actually is falling off of here. So that means that our size is not big enough for our font. So we'll bring that back down, bring that in, and add the last line here. Great. So that'll be our box with our paint on there. Finally, when we're looking at this, these letters are all sprayed on when they're done through a stencil, and we can see that there's some overspray. So we'll add that in next. So I can go in here, and we're going to add a filter layer. We're going to go in here and blur. So what this is going to do is it blurs everything that's below the filter layer. So we'll go ahead and throw that blur up a little bit. And then when we look at all of this, you'll see that it doesn't actually blur everywhere. It's just in some places. So again, we're going to add a fill, and this is where we'll get back our grunge maps. And we're going to take this one, and I'm going to multiply it. And we want more contrast. That's probably too much contrast. And to change our balance, so now there's just some overspray. And then if we want to, again, we can change this to triplanar, move it around. It looks like most of the overspray to me was in this middle section here. So that'll be our overspray. And then we can actually duplicate these layers and bring them to the top. So when I do that, now we have our paint showing back up basically. Sorry, duplicate this up there, and then one more, Control D is duplicate. Cool, so now we have our paint layers back up there, and then we have some overspray, which Looks like it's not showing up as much as I would want it to. If I want it to be there, I can add a levels node and bring that in a little bit. Cool. So now we have some overspray as well as our letters in their nice place. So that'll be pretty much it for texturing. Again, this can get super complicated. We can build our own smart materials from scratch, bring them in from like something like Substance Designer, but this is just a quick introduction. For exporting is something that I'll go over. File export, it pops up with this big window here. We have our output templates here. Again, this can be super complicated. We'll do document channels, normal and AO for now. That will give us a normal map, our color map, roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion by default. And that's usually what you need to get something working in an engine. There's some other reasons to have other maps out there, but that's what you'll get out of it. And this is why it was important for us to set up OpenGL versus DirectX at the beginning of our document, as when we export these for Unreal, we'll want that to be in DirectX as opposed to OpenGL. There's a lot of different options in here for a bunch of different stuff, but we'll stick with document for now. If you want to make your own template one day, that's fine. It's something that we can go over later, but isn't really needed for a quick little project or a game jam. So yeah, make sure you save often, but that'll be it for texturing. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you want to see some more stuff in depth. We can go over that a little bit later as well, or what this looks like with a more polished asset. Again, these are all super sharp seams, so we don't get as much information here on the breakup as the seams as we would us, something that was smooth and beveled. But for now, I think that'll be good. See you next time.